Final part of our unit on ecology is about ecological succession. For an ecosystem to be really healthy, it needs to have species richness, which is simply the number, and variety of different species found in the community. The problem is that many times that species richness is disrupted, and it's disrupted by the destruction of habitat and the extinction of organisms. And so that community never reaches its ultimate point of being healthy and rich and vital because it can't. A general term for this is disturbances. And a disturbance is really any event like a storm, fire, flood, drought, the overgrazing, that means overeating in that area, or even human activity that changes a community by removing organisms from it or altering resource availability. And these disturbances can destroy habitats and cause the richness and really the biodiversity of that community to be reduced or destroyed. One of the main ways, or perhaps quickest ways, this happens is through human activities, that in reality cause the greatest disturbances to communities, through logging, agriculture and development, through mining and farming. We go into a community that has existed and thrived, and because of our disruption, we cause great havoc in the survivability of the species and the populations within that community. So what happens after there is a major disruption to a living community? And what happens is the whole concept in ecology of succession, which is the gradual and sequential regrowth of an area following that disturbance. And in ecology, we look at two types of succession. We look at primary succession and secondary succession. In primary succession, we look at the development of a community in an area that has not previously supported life, and so this is an area that is so decimated, so desolate, that there is no logical way of seeing life supported because there is no real resources or area for organisms to survive. An example of an area that might need to undergo primary succession would be a bare rock, a sand dune, an island perhaps formed by a volcanic eruption where there's nothing but sand or rocks to provide the basic environment for life. Primary succession often occurs very slowly simply because the minerals necessary for plant life are unavailable. What you need is a lot of time, and then rocks will eventually break down due to weathering and create the soil necessary for plant life to occur. Some of the very first forms of life that occur in primary succession are organisms like lichens, who tend to be the first to colonize these areas. And lichens are an amazing organism that are actually a mutualistic, like we talked about in one of the previous videos, where both organisms are benefited. a mutualistic relationship between algae and fungus, and they often grow on rocks or trees, and they really don't need a lot of extra soil or minerals to survive, and so they're some of the first organisms to thrive in primary succession. Eventually, the combination of minerals from rocks and from dead organic matter from the lichens, they'll begin to form a thin layer of soil so that a few grass-like organisms can grow. And as these plants die, you get more and more decayed organic matter, which creates soil, and pretty soon shrubs will appear, and then not long after that, you'll see trees. At times you'll see communities where there's a disturbance, like a fire or a volcanic eruption, where not all aspects of the community are destroyed. And so what's left is a lot of dead organic matter and soil. And so there's lots of opportunities for things to grow. And this is called secondary succession, which is the replacement of species that follows a disturbance in an already existing community. The disruption to this community may have occurred from a natural disaster like a forest fire or a strong storm, perhaps human activities like clear-cutting the forest, mining, or farming, but the disturbance has left soil intact, and so that is a much better place for that environment to start again and grow organisms. In secondary succession, you start with the pioneer species. These are the organisms that tend to grow first and colonize the area, and they grow quickly and are able to reproduce quickly. And then you have perennial grasses, shrubs, softwood trees and pines, and finally hardwoods. And each group of organisms succeeds the other. That's why we call this secondary succession. It's these groups of organisms that eventually have adaptations that make them well suited to actually invading and occupying a new area. For example, they may be very good at seed dispersal or have adaptations that allow them to withstand harsh conditions. And so even in those harsh conditions, those organisms are able to reproduce, to survive, and eventually multiply their species in that area. The final part of secondary succession is climax communities. Of course, the community has gone through multiple series of stages until it reaches this point. But in this type of succession, the community reaches this stable endpoint that consists of certain organisms like hardwood trees and other organisms like foxes and white-tailed deer that help sustain the life of the community. And this is a healthy community that tends to last for many, many, many years. An interesting fact is that the organisms in each stage of succession during secondary succession is that these organisms actually alter the physical environment in ways that make it less favorable for themselves and more favorable for the organisms that follow, which seems a little counterintuitive, but really what they're doing is paving the way for the climax community, which is a group of organisms that remains constant for a long period of time. Hope this helps. It's all about ecology, populations, and communities. that change over time, and they change because of the disturbances that are created both by nature and by us. Thanks for watching.